I'll toast to that. I've got a session IPA here. Lake of
Dude,
Bays Brewing.
You didn't tell me we're drinking, bro. I have water in my
I didn't
cup
invite
here.
you. You should have a beer too.
It's too late, dude. I can go up in the kitchen real quick if you want me to.
What would happen if you had a beer right now? Like a real beer?
I would die. You wouldn't want to. We wouldn't finish recording. I would fall. I'm in my standing desk, right? I'd like to fall out of the frame.
Ahoy, ahoy! Welcome to Head Games, the science and psychology of sports. I'm Dr. Brett Levine, joined as always by Dr. Ben Rosenberg. Ben, how are you?
My eyes are burning. It's smoky. There's COVID everywhere. Like, we should all be in Canada like you, bro. Like, I don't know what's happening. California's on fire. It's hot. Like, it's nuts, man. It's nuts.
Yeah.
How's it going up north?
It's 75. There's a light breeze.
Oh,
There's no fires. COVID rates are low.
Delectable.
I'm not leaving. I'm probably not leaving.
I don't blame you, bro. I
The
mean,
citizenship test is you have to drink 2 liters of maple syrup under a minute, and they really grade you on your puck handling skills. I got to work on both. So
what about the I heard there was a Molson Ice challenge as well. What's that about?
Yeah, you dunk yourself in Molson Ice, and then you stand outside in the freezing cold, and they basically time you. Again, it's a time challenge. We are continuing the theme from last episode. We're talking about group dynamics. And last episode we talked about like individual level psychology versus group level psychology. We talked a little bit about team cohesion. So we're going to continue that theme, talking about group level stuff. We're going to talk hockey again as well, maybe because I'm in Canada, but also hockey's pretty cool and playoffs are going on. And NBA playoffs have started as well, so we're going to be talking about NBA playoffs. Before we get started, though, I want to take a moment and say congratulations. This is our 10th episode. Really awesome.
Who knew we'd make it this far?
Yeah, we haven't been permanently banned for foul language or lewd imagery. We've made it
Shocking.
10 episodes without anything terrible happening, so that's great. What do we have going for us? It's certainly not our good looks. It's because we don't have any of those. It's our team.
Definitely not.
We really have, I think, a great squad. We thank Josh Baca at the end of every episode for working pretty hard. He's got a full-time job, and then he edits our episodes. He keeps things quirky. He keeps things fun. He works so hard for us. So thank you, Joshy boy. And we got to give some love to Brett Glattman, our social media boy. Our social media boy. Everybody's boys. Gladdy Ice. For really having the vision and the hustle and the outreach to move us forward. So, like I said, you and I are just sort of these figureheads, but we're propped up by a great team.
Big time.
Yep. I'll toast to that. I've got a session IPA here. Lake of Bays Brewing.
You didn't tell me we're drinking, bro. I have water in my
I didn't invite you. You should have a beer too.
It's too late, dude. I can go up in the kitchen real quick if you want me to.
What would happen if you had a beer right now? Like a real beer?
I would die. You wouldn't want to. We wouldn't finish recording. I would fall. I'm in my standing desk, right? I'd like to fall out of the frame.
Explain to the people why.
I have celiac disease. Not that anybody cares or wants to know, but I have celiac disease. So Brett's always plotting to try to fucking poison me.
I think I'll keep you around.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do news first, and then we can get into the main topic. Reds broadcaster and human dipwad Tom Brennaman was caught in a hot mic moment before the end of a commercial break during the Reds-Royals game. I think it was yesterday, where he used a homophobic slur to – I think he was talking about Kansas City as a whole.
Yeah.
It was a hot mic moment, and it came out later during the game that he had said it on air, and he did an on-air apology. And as he's apologizing on air, there's a home run hit by the Reds, and it lands in the left field bleachers.
So good.
And above, just above the bleachers, there's a sign that says "judgment-free zone" as he's apologizing. Yeah. This is a bad look. The Reds apologized. Reds pitcher Amir Garrett tweeted about it. It's not great. Ben, you're an expert in prejudice. Is this just is the removal of Tom Brennaman from this role, is this just cancel culture, or does he deserve it?
Man, I mean, let me first say that this is a really bad look for baseball. Baseball already has a reputation, as we've talked about some, as being basically stodgy old white dudes. This doesn't help them to have broadcasters saying shit like this on the air. Bad look. To your question, this is tough, man. I fumble with this all the time, right? Like, people are allowed to make mistakes. And we've talked about that on our pod about Drew Brees. People are allowed to make mistakes. I think the best outcome would be to use this as a learning, teaching tool. You said I'm an expert in prejudice. There's a lot of research that shows that people can indeed overcome their prejudices and their biases. We are, as humans, natural bias makers, natural prejudice makers. We've talked about that. So there are ways to overcome this, right? And it's not as simple as like some shitty online, anti-prejudice training. It's like interacting, giving back to the community, interacting with people who have had experiences, educating yourself about the experiences of the LGBTQ plus community. Like, that's important, man. And especially right now with all the other stuff that's happening in the country, it will be exceptionally important for Tom Brennaman, for anybody who's in this position, to confront their biases, to educate themselves, to have interactions with people who are part of that community, and other people who've made mistakes, right? Again, we all make mistakes. We slip up. Maybe he was intending to say something harmful. Maybe he wasn't. Either way, that word is harmful to people, and he has to get a better understanding of that.
Yeah. Quickly, there was no doubt about it. Like, he really emphasized it too when he said it. He really said it in, I think, a pretty hurtful way. It wasn't as if he slipped up or made like a crude joke or something. Like, it was pretty hurtful.
It was.
I have the same notes here as you. Like, I think he should take some time off. I'm not the Reds organization to decide how long that should be, but take some time off to educate yourself on the rampant discrimination that the LGBTQ community has faced, and meet with advocates and sympathize and come back a better person. And what a great story that would be, right? If he takes time to go learn about this and listen and change himself and come back and maybe get your job back. Otherwise it's sad. It's sad. I don't want to get too much into this, but you're right. It's not a good look for baseball. It's really sort of, I think, scuffling. Every sport has its challenges, but I think certainly,
but baseball is just so stodgy in some ways. And like you and I were going back and forth this week about the unwritten rule thing, and I think that plays into the whole deal. Like Manny Machado, other guys who are, or Tim Anderson, guys who are just flouting these so-called like unwritten rules. Like, the pushback that they get from the old stodgy white dudes in baseball are the same people who are saying shit like this on the air. And like, that's just, it's a bad look for the game, man. It's anti-progressive. It's anti what baseball needs to be right now in order to stay afloat, in order to gain more fans, and to be on a level with the NBA and the NFL, which it's not. And that's a shame, because we are both huge baseball people.
Yep. Hopefully brighter days ahead for baseball as a whole, especially post-COVID. Yeah. Let's move on to something a little bit more cheerful. It's NHL playoffs. We talked about it last episode. I was all about the Stars Flames game, which was fun. I think it was 1-1 in the series. It's now 3-2 Dallas. We can talk about that in a bit if we want. Yeah. But anyway, I want to talk about, we've got NHL playoffs. We have NBA playoffs. I want to talk about what's missing from these COVID playoffs, which is home ice or home court advantage. This is huge. This is huge. The gambling community is, I think, a little ticklish about this. But I think as fans, too, we want to know a little bit more about what's going on. It's broken out into 3 areas, I think. Number one, for home court or home ice, there's no fans right now playing in a bubble. There's a lack of the home court feel, or as we say, like familiarity. You don't know where like the dents or the dead spots are, or just general feeling of being on your home court.
Like Fenway, remember we were talking about Fenway Park, like, where the Green Monster is if you've played there 82 games or 81 games that year. And if you're a road team, you've played 3 games that year, you're less familiar.
Yep, exactly. And the last part is sleeping at home. Everyone's sleeping in a hotel. It's the Ritz-Carlton or whatever, who knows, but it's these three factors. This has been studied a bit. I did a little bit of just some like, hodgepodgey research to sort of dig into this a little bit more, but it's an issue. LeBron was quoted the other day as saying, I'm going to continue to say this. It's different. This is a game with no fans. He's alluding to the absence of fans, and I think we want to talk a little bit more about that group dynamic thing, because that'll play a factor. But let me get into my analysis first, and then we'll come back to you with a little bit of psychological theory. I first look at the NHL, and I controlled for an imbalance in home games for the higher seed. So in a 7-game series, there's an imbalance for the higher seed. In 7 games, the higher seed always has 4 home games, and the lower seed has 3. Or if it ends in 5 games, it's 3 for the higher seed and 2 for the lower seed. So I tried to control for that. And I just looked at the goal difference at the end of every game. And I went back for the NHL. I went back to realignment, which was 6 years ago in 2014, and I used every full season. So I used 2019 to 2014. It was 6 seasons, and there's a plus 0.3 goal difference favoring the home team. So if the visiting team won, it would be negative. Like if the visiting team won 4-2, it would be a -2. Whereas if the home team won 4-2, it would be a +2. I basically added all of these up, or I averaged all of these, and it came out to favoring the home team.
And so that's on a per game. That's a per game basis.
And yes, sorry,
goal favor.
Yep, and that's a per game basis. So controlling for the advantage of the higher seed, which would sort of outweigh things, right? If the higher seed was baked into that, a higher seed is probably better, and there's probably more goals scored at home. So I tried to control for that and just look at an even amount of home games, and it's 0.3. The problem is that the average home victory is by 2.23 goals.
Jesus.
Meaning it'll take you about 7 games to get from 0.3 to that level.
Got you.
It'll take you some time for that 0.3 to really have an effect. The idea here is it's small.
Yeah.
The playing at home ice is a small effect. And with 7 home games, it's not going to make a difference. I should also make a quick caveat. I should have said this earlier. I was only looking at first round because we're in the first round of NBA and NHL playoffs. This is only first round. So it's 7 games. You're already out of the first round. 7 home games.
Yeah.
You're already out of the first round.
Right. You're mid second round series.
Yeah. Right. So the average Stanley Cup championship team plays like 22 to 25-ish games. Yeah. You're looking at maybe 2 to 3 games being swayed one way or another because of home ice.
It's not meaningless.
It's not meaningless. It's not bad.
It's not huge, but it's not meaningless.
Yeah. It's something. It's not huge. Right now, so the 2020 playoffs, excuse me, Canadian beer.
Do your burps smell like poutine when they come up?
It's automatically. Same burps. I use the qualifying round as well as the first round. I have 71 games right now, and there's a game going on right now, actually. No, sorry, there's a game going on a little bit. It's at negative 0.18, meaning that the visitor, after 71 games, the visitor is slightly favored in the NHL playoffs. Like the visitor is getting
sample either.
Home ice or visiting ice advantage. It's not a small sample. Yeah, 71 games, right?
Yeah. But I guess if you, to what we're going to talk about in a minute, if you consider each aspect of what you just laid out, right? The fans, the familiarity, and kind of the rest aspect, like if basically all those things are equal across the teams now, maybe that makes some sense that it sways a little bit the other way, or is, close-ish to 0. I don't know.
It should be 0. It should basically be 0 because everybody's in the bubble. So it should be 0. Maybe over time it will. If it doesn't, that's weird. I don't know.
Yeah, that was weird. Fluky.
To the NBA, I did the same thing. I basically did the same analysis. I tried to control for like the higher seed and just peel away and look at home court advantage. I also used the last 6 seasons. I could have gone further. It was taking me a while. So I just did the 6 again. And the difference I had was in favor of the home team by 3.25 points. And I did some research on this as well because other people have done this, especially for basketball. There's another model by Ben Taylor, author of Thinking Basketball, who said home court was about 3.5 points. So close. And then two statisticians at Wharton, Oliver Entine and Dylan Small.
Smarter people than us, undoubtedly.
Yep. They did an analysis on the regular season and found that home court was worth 3.62 points. So I think it's on track with my sort of sketchy analysis. That you're looking at like probably it's a little bit higher. It's probably closer to like 3.5 points for every home court advantage. That's not going to be there this year. Nothing. Like everybody's kind of evened out. In Entine and Small's analysis, though, they found that rest was important. So rest, I believe it included things like travel and back-to-back games or days of rest in between. And they said it's important, but it only explains about 9% of home court advantage, meaning about 90% of this is explained by the other two factors. It's like the feel or the familiarity of home court or 20,000 screaming fans, that make up that other 90%. Meaning between the court and the fans, you're looking at like probably 3.2 points, like a majority of that. Let's get into the psychology here. Let's talk about group dynamics. Why would 20,000 screaming fans make up that, majority of that point difference?
Well, so one aside quickly about research methods. I'm sorry. I'm a research methods professor. I'm a fucking nerd. I'm sorry. But one point that I want to make is that your, what you called sketchy analysis. Yeah, maybe it was sketchy. Maybe you were drinking Canadian beer while you did it, but it aligns with these other two probably more thorough, in-depth analyses, which to me indicates that it's probably pretty accurate, right? Like the fact that all three of these things are converging is a good thing. It's telling us that all three different sources say about this much is accounted for by the home court advantage. So that's helpful. In psychology and research methods, we call that convergent validity. These three things are aligning to point to about the same answer, gives us confidence that
they converge.
They converge. Gives us confidence that we're looking at kind of the right thing. So anyways, that's an aside. Sorry, had to pause for research methods nerdiness.
Thanks.
So more about thinking about what the fans would be contributing to this home court advantage, right? There's two aspects. There's the fans, and then there's also this familiarity that we were talking about before. So really briefly, the familiarity thing. It does seem to matter that guys are familiar with their home court versus going on the road. I had mentioned Fenway Park earlier just because that's an easy kind of landmark for everybody to think about. If you play all your games there, you know how a ball is going to carry them off without thinking about it.
Describe that a little bit, though. Like, and I think you're onto something because a baseball stadium to baseball stadium is very different. And you mentioned Fenway Park. Right. With these weird dimensions, and left field is like a lot closer, but it's also with they call it the green monster. Is the wall goes up like 100 feet or so? It's crazy.
It's super tall. Yeah.
Right. So the quirkiness though of a baseball stadium, stadium to stadium, is a lot different than a basketball court, which is the same, right? Is it any different?
Well, on its surface, it's the same, right? But basketball courts do differ. Some teams, like the Nuggets and the Avs, share the Pepsi Center in Denver, right? And I remember I lived there for a while, and I remember hearing that the court in Denver was different because there's fucking ice underneath it. And so it would change things about how it played. It also made it so the arena was like super cold. Right. So it just could change dynamics of the game just enough that if you're familiar with it, you know how to prepare for it. Maybe you always wear your leggings under your shorts or whatever when you play there to stay warm. It could change just enough how you play. The more kind of legendary example, as we were talking about this offline, is the Boston Garden, where the Celtics used to play back in the day. It was this crazy old parquet floor, and there are all these dead spots. And literally the guys on the Celtics knew where the dead spots were, so they could kind of play with them during the game. They could guide an opposing player to a dead spot. So we'd try to dribble and the fucking ball would go somewhere else, or it would stop bouncing. Right? So quirks like that and knowing where they are, not having to think about them. If I'm an opponent, I have to actively cognize about how am I going to play a ball off the green monster, or how am I going to avoid these dead spots in the floor? If I have a roadmap in my head of where they are, psychologists call that being fluent with something. If I'm perceptually fluent, like I can just kind of go about my business and focus on the task at hand rather than focusing on this other shit and avoiding it.
Yep.
And that enables me to perform more smoothly and to perform better.
But if you're not playing basketball in the Boston Garden in the 1970s and you're not playing in Denver,
right,
it's more or less the same, right?
More or less the same. There's, I'm sure, still some degree of familiarity, maybe the courts, maybe where the announcers are, or, where the fans come in or whatever, but more or less going to be the same. I would say the bigger issue, probably, and the bigger contributor to this home court advantage that we keep seeing is the fans. I mean, this is what we're really talking about before with the group dynamics thing. So I think the two concepts that speak the most as to what might be happening here both have to do with efficacy. And efficacy is our belief in our ability to do something and to do something well. So we have both self and then collective efficacy. Self-efficacy is all about my own belief in my ability to do something. Like if I jump on a basketball court, can I bang the three from half court like Dame Lillard? Well, I obviously cannot, but if you're Dame Lillard, you obviously can. Go Blazers, by the way. Big Dame Lillard fan these days.
Let's go.
The other aspect is collective efficacy, which is a group's kind of to get all of their self-efficacies put together. It's their collective belief that they can achieve something. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really where the fan influence comes in, that being surrounded by 20,000 people, maybe they're not all your fans, right? But most of them, the loudest ones, are your team's fans if you're at home, screaming for you, pumping you up. That's going to really jack up your team's collective efficacy and your belief in your ability that you can perform. And that is no joke, man. Collective efficacy is shown to be linked to all of these awesome outcomes, including performance in sports, performance of like people giving talks, of teachers. It's linked to all of this good stuff.
Yep. That makes sense. I think that's pretty straightforward. It's like when 20,000 fans are screaming for either you or your team, that's got to feel good. You feel like you can do good. It. Totally. Yeah, you feel like you can come. I think there's some, I'm referencing research that I wish I could cite with more accuracy here, but like I think it was actually, This Is Your Brain on Sports, that book that we love. Mm-hmm. A small deficit at halftime for a home team maybe was enough to create like a victory later on. Like
interesting.
The small, I should check that before I just say it. But to your point, like the idea of even when you're down, even when you're losing, when so many fans are screaming for you and there's enough time to come back, whether it be at halftime or whether it be in the third or fourth quarter, it can happen. I think that it definitely makes a lot of sense. To the point about self-efficacy and collective efficacy, we talk about the differences between individual level psychology and group level psychology, and how they're sort of like different fields, really. Like there's a bunch of stuff over here for self and there's a bunch of stuff over here for the group level. But between self-efficacy and group collective efficacy, it kind of sounds just like the same thing. It just sounds like a bunch of self-efficacies put together into a larger entity known as the team. Is that fair? Like, is it really any different?
Well, you could have players who, not all of whom have high self-efficacy, but you could have high group or collective efficacy, right? So on any team, there's bound to be variability in individual players' belief in their own abilities, right? If I'm Dame, I have presumably more belief in my abilities than, I can't even name, some crappy player at the end of their bench. Perhaps his self-efficacy is a little bit less. That doesn't necessarily have to impact the group's collective efficacy, though, right? The efficacy of the group as a whole could be different than each individual player's self-efficacy added up.
Yep. That's interesting. Yeah. So there's even within collective efficacy, there's two ways of looking at it, right? There's like, if you and I were on a team and your self-efficacy is off the charts and mine isn't, am I brought up or am I affected because you're hitting threes from half court? those like interdependent dynamics between players and the relationships between everybody is sort of one level of that. But then you're saying at an even higher level, it's sort of like a bigger collective level. There's a whole other thing. If you just look at the team as one whole, rather than these connected little pieces, that you can think about it differently.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting is that even if my self-efficacy is boosted if every time I hit a three or whatever, even if it doesn't affect yours individually, but me hitting those threes continuously could affect the broader collective team's efficacy, right? So there's just different things, as you said, going on. They're certainly connected, but they don't have to be. Like, why does my making a three affect your self-efficacy? But my making a three would affect the team's collective efficacy, which would undoubtedly be affected by my fans supporting me and yelling at me.
And that's missing this year. There's none of that. We got nothing. Yeah. It's what's interesting is it's all a moot point at this at this COVID playoffs.
It's bizarre, man.
There's no fans. There's no there's no familiarity. Yeah. There could be some level, like maybe you got. No, do these teams get practice time on those courts? Like if you practice more than another team on a certain court, there might be a little bit.
Maybe a little familiarity, but I would assume those things are like all pretty equal. I mean, this makes this bubble thing for both NHL and NBA kind of an interesting like field experiment, right? Like what you did for the NHL, like you would expect, because these things are basically equal now, that the home court, so to speak, advantage should be null. Like there isn't a home court. They don't have any of these three things. Although what is fun, so here's what's funny. And the bubble initially in the NBA, the teams who were already in the top 8 seeds got to stay in like the sickest top of the line hotel. And the other team stayed in like a slightly shittier, not as nice, but still for like our standard, super nice hotel. The Blazers got to move to the doper hotel when they beat where they were playing in the play-in game. And got to move to the Grizzlies into the nicer hotel with all the other playoff teams now. So if there was any effect, it would like be on the one Blazers team because they're in like better beds now or something. Yeah. Which, I mean, they did win game 1 against the Lakers the other night, and they play game 2 tonight. I think they're probably going to get shit on, but hopefully not.
I was going to say theoretically, like they should be at a disadvantage because they've had to stay in a crappier hotel and maybe get, less sleep or less rest. Yeah. They've also played more, and they've played more stress inducing games.
Super high stress.
Yeah. So there you go. I don't want to get into predictions because I think we might do more in the NBA later next week, talk a little bit more. Yeah. There's also a lot more to, I think, predicting some of these potential upsets. And that's kind of what we want to allude to, is that without home court advantage, there could be more upsets, especially between like the 4 versus the 5 and the 3 versus the 6. There's other stuff that's baked into it. And shout out to the Ringer that did a really cool model. They did the NBA restart odds, and Zach Cram at the Ringer did a cool model on this. And you can look at that for predictions, but
I would say though, anecdotally, you are seeing some more upsets in these first initial couple games of the NBA series. Like you've already had 2 8 seeds beat a 1 seed in game 1, which I don't know if that's ever happened before for both 8 seeds to beat the 1. The Clippers, who are the 2 seed, got shit on last night by the Mavs, who are the 7. Like, there are seemingly some interesting things happening, and who knows? It could just be fluky. It's only a few games, but it could also be at least partially due to this lack of really any kind of home court advantage.
Yeah. One last point, and this is really a comparison between the 2 sports that are in playoff mode right now. By my count, the NBA has had 8 upsets in the last 6 years. So just over 1 upset per year. The NHL has had 19.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the just unpredictability.
NHL's wild, man.
Of the puck bouncing around versus an NBA game, which might be a little bit more controlled in terms of possession of a ball and dynamics, things like that. But
skill almost always wins out over an NBA series, right? Like it's rare, as you said, that there is an upset on a series in the NBA. NHL, I think much more about hockey than me, but the NHL is like known for the seeding just not mattering nearly as much as in the NBA.
Yeah. Well, I mean, based on these upsets, it's like 19
Nuts,
in 6
man.
years is a lot versus.
Yeah, that's wild.
I might count. It looks like 8 here.
Yeah.
And there's of the 8 upsets, and this is just first round. I should clarify again. This is just first round upsets. Of the 8 upsets, majority of them were the 4 versus the 5. There were only 2 where it was 3 versus the 6.
Which is like basically 4-5 is like a toss up. You know, I mean, in NCAA tournament times, once it gets those 8-9 or in the second round is 4-5, it's like these teams are basically equal. You know, often it's a one game or something that separates them.
Yep. Hey man, congrats on our 10th episode, and yeah,
you too, man.
Big thanks to the whole team, and hopefully, like the beer says, paddle on.
Paddle on, dude.
Any closing thoughts before we wrap our 10th episode up?
Oh, I'm jealous you're in Canada, bro. Jealous you're in fucking Canada.
Life's good.
Life's good. Say hi to Drake again for me. Tell him I miss him.
I will. Yeah, he's my neighbor here.
I know. The weekend too. Say hi to the weekend for me.
Right,
also. I bet he's up there.
Right. Please rate and subscribe where you can for the show. We really appreciate it. You can find us on Twitter at HeadGamePsych. You can find me on Twitter at Dr. Bret Levine, and you can find that guy on Twitter at BD Rosenberg PhD. Thanks as always to Josh Baca, for editing and producing, and we'll throw it in there as well. Thanks Brett Glattman, Gladiice, for social media management and everything you do for us. Peace. Thanks guys, and thanks for tuning in.